Hey guys, how you doing? It's me, WT. I gotta admit, I'm a little bit nervous. This is my first video lesson, and yeah, it took me some time to prepare, and it's definitely got a weird vibe. Um, I hope you're doing okay. I'm okay. I have my ups and downs. It's kind of I don't know, a little nerve-wracking sometimes, and I definitely miss the routine of school, and I miss all of your faces, um, and I miss teaching, and I miss all my friends, and I'm sure that you're feeling some of the same way. So I just wanted to let you know that I'm going to come to you live once a week and have some lessons for you and hopefully answer some of the questions you have about whatever we're doing in class at that time. So this is my little office. It's very tiny. I call it the Harry Potter office, but this is where I come to work and grade my papers and all that stuff. So this is where I'll be doing the videos. So let's get down to business. Before we left, about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago, I gave you a novel and a study guide. Okay, some of you got this old copy and some of you got the new copy. It's red and yellow. But there were quite a few students that were absent during that period of time. And so my hope was that they went to school and picked up the study guide and the novel from the table in the cafeteria, and that was given to you. If you're still without a novel, you can access it by Googling free PDF of Lord of the Flies, and you should be able to get one pretty readily because it is a classic novel. They're typically free. Or you could just get the audio version, which is free on YouTube. So that's very easy to do. And I suggest the best way to do it is, if you are an auditory learner, is to follow along with the book as you're listening to the story. And it's a really, really good way to learn that way. But if you don't have a study guide, or you lost your book or whatever, let me know and I can guide you to how to get a novel, and I can send you a copy of a study guide that is similar to the one that I have gave you before we left. I've already sent this to a couple of students, and I don't expect you to have to print this study guide out. Originally, when we thought we were just going to be out for 2 weeks, I thought that I would collect these when we came back to school. That's still a possibility. So if you have a paper copy of this study guide, write the answers right on it. If you have an electronic version, don't worry about printing it out. What I want you to do is just get some loose leaf paper and write the chapter number and the numbers from the study guide and answer the questions on loose leaf paper. And when the time comes, if I don't see you the rest of this school year, I'll just have you take pictures of your responses and send them to me that way. So no worries. The whole deal here is that it's very flexible. So at this point, you should have read chapters 1, 2, and 3. And some of you probably have read 4, 5, 6, and 7 as well. We're just going to focus on chapters 1, 2, and 3. And if you haven't yet read them or listened to them, don't worry, but please start doing that. Okay, it's time to buckle down and get down to business. So what I've sent so far to communicate with you is via School Tool. It was the first time I reached out. I think it was the 16th. And I sent a letter to all of the students and parents through School Tool. But I'm hearing back that some people didn't get it for whatever reason. So then on the 19th, I put a letter on Schoology, which is still there. And if you log into Schoology, over to the right-hand side, there should be a list next to classes of the things that you have to do for me. So that should be there. So far there's been 2 letters home. And then recently I put on there this quiz. And I'm calling it a quiz, but we were told today that we aren't taking formal grades, and so I'll use this as an assessment to see how well you're understanding the novel, but you won't be getting like 100 or a 97 or whatever on it. I will take notes here at home about each student and how each student is understanding the novel, and at some point we will come to some understanding, maybe a pass-fail system. I don't really know. We're all, the teachers and the administrators, we're learning as we go. We still haven't heard from the state about some things. So as far as the study guide goes, don't worry about being perfect, okay? Do your best. And so I'm going to read this to you because you won't have a paper copy unless you have a printer at home. You can do the quiz right on Schoology. And it says quiz chapters 1 through 3, due by 8 p.m. Thursday, March 26th. That's in 2 days. Ideally, I would like to have them by that time because you've had a couple of weeks now to read the first 3 chapters, and that's really not a lot me to expect of you. And so you should have read it by now, and you should be ready to take this quiz. I noticed when I went on Schoology, the directions appear on a separate page. So I want to make this clear. It says at the top, answer the questions using an example or quote from the novel. Write the example or quote and the page number of the example or quote you use. Write in complete sentences. So there's 2 parts. You have to answer the question, and then you have to give an example or a quote. And I'm going to turn this around. I don't know if you can see it, but there's this, it says page number, and there's a blank. So on Schoology, it gives the question, and then it says page number, and there's a blank, and you're going to wonder what that's about. What that's about is you have to give an example or a quote from the book to back up your answer. Okay? So there are 10 questions. A couple of them are opinion questions and don't need page numbers. And if it didn't need a page number, I just didn't put a page number blank there. So if you find yourself struggling with any of these questions, do the best you can. Again, we're not shooting for getting perfect scores on these. I'm checking your understanding of the novel. And if, let's say, you get question 4, what is more important to accomplish first on the island, and you don't have a clue, take a wild guess, and then I'll see that you're struggling with that, and I can reach out to you. So we talked about the study guide. We've talked about our first quiz. I'll be putting the second quiz on there probably by this Friday, but it won't be due until next week, so no worries there. Let me just check my notes, see if I'm on track here. Yep. Oh, due dates are flexible. That was something administration wanted us to make clear. So again, I said this is due Thursday, March 26th, which is in 2 days. If you don't get it done by then, don't stress about it. I know that some people are sharing computers and you may not have access the way that you'd like to. So for those of you who are really conscientious about your schoolwork, don't let the due date throw you. You can turn it in. It won't be late, okay? So right now I'm going to be talking about chapters 1, 2, and 3 from Lord of the Flies, and what I'd like you to do is to get your novel. So dig it out of your backpack, get it from your nightstand, wherever it is, and there's a couple of passages that I'm going to be reading from Lord of the Flies, and I just want you to follow along so you know what I'm talking about. So in chapter 1, for those of you who were in school, it was called The Sound of the Shell, and we met a couple of boys, and I just want to make clear the circumstances under which they got on the island. And for some of you this will be redundant, excuse me about that, but I have to explain it again. There is some unnamed war going on that Piggy alludes to in his conversation with Ralph. Those are the 2 characters we meet in the beginning. And we're under the impression that the plane was shot down and that it crashed on this tropical island. The boys are British schoolboys that go to boarding school. They don't live at home, they live at school. They have school uniforms, and they all have different school uniforms because they come from different schools, so they don't necessarily know each other. That's why it seems weird that you've got all these boys that are on a plane together, yet they don't know who each other is. It's because they come from different schools. And the plane is loaded with boys headed to safety. We don't know where safety is. We just know that they're leaving Britain for safety during this war. The plane crashes. The plane wreckage gets washed out to sea, and with it many of the boys die, but there are some left alive. So that's the circumstances under which they end up on this island. There are no adults on the island. There was a pilot who died in the crash, and I don't think there were no teachers, so it's just the boys. I have a set of notes here that I went through, and I want to, if I'm looking down, I'm looking at my notes. So in chapter 1, Golding introduces the novel's main characters as well as its theme, and this is super important. And we talked a little bit about this, that evil is present in all of us. And we talked about whether humans were innately good or innately evil. We had a little bit of conversation about that in the anticipation guide, but Golding is presenting to us that evil is present in all of us. And I think that during this time that we're living in right now, I have certainly seen examples of that online, scrolling through Facebook. The other night I saw 3 people in a grocery store having a fist fight over toilet paper. Does that make them evil? No, but it certainly makes them lack civility, civilization. And that's one of the concepts that Golding is talking about in this novel as well. So the novel opens with the description of a long scar smashed into the jungle. And for those of you that were in school, we talked about the scar is the actual divot in the earth that the plane creates as it crashes. And then there's a reference to the snake-like damage done by the plane as it's crashed to the island. The jungle represents nature. And then we are introduced to something called the platform, which is a piece of land that is elevated. And there's a bunch of old palm trees that sort of are fallen all over it. And that's where the boys congregate to meet and have their meetings. And we also meet the conch shell, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But both of those things, the platform and the conch shell, represent politics and civilization and institutionalized order. Okay, and this is a novel about contrasts, the contrast between chaos and order, the contrast between good and evil, shadow and light, all of those things and a lot more. I'm just touching the surface. One of the things I'd like you to know is that this novel is so rich, and I had said that I'm not just having you read it because it's a classic. I'm not just having you read it because it's going to make you think about the nature of humankind, but I'm also having you read it because William Golding, as much of a horrible person as he sounded in our introductory conversations about him, he was brilliant. He was a brilliant writer, and he really wove this novel tightly so we could see clearly a lot of different elements in his novel that were symbolic, so we're going to pay attention to those. We've got Ralph at the beginning, and we're not sure if we like him or not. He's described as being fair-haired, which is blonde, and an attractive kid, and people seem to be naturally gravitate towards him. We don't know if that's because of his personality or if it's because he's the one that found and blew the conch shell, that called all the boys from the island forward to the platform. But we know that he's elected leader at the beginning for superficial reasons, much like democratic politics. He is personable and he appears to be in charge because of his use of the conch shell. And then we meet Jack, who clearly has some experience in exerting control over other people, because he's in charge of a choir, and he makes his choir boys march in assembly in this tropical heat in their cloaks, even after a plane crash. And I want to explain, first of all, the importance of a choir in Britain. To be in the choir in a British boarding school, and I don't know if that's true for modern times, but definitely back in the day, 1950s we're talking about, being a part of a choir was a position of honor. You had to try out to be in the choir. You would perform at various themed events, and you had very elaborate costumes that you wore as uniforms to identify you as being part of the choir. And Jack is the leader of the choir, so he really believes that he's something important, and I guess where he comes from he is, and so he really wants to be that important character. But in the first chapter there is conflict already between who's going to be leader, Ralph or Jack, and Jack loses out, and he doesn't like that very much. So Ralph concedes and says, well, you can have your choir, and then they decide that the choir is going to be the Hunters. I wanted you to reflect a little bit. This would have been a handout I would have given you if we were at school, but actually we were going to be doing some group work the day that we got dismissed. And the group work was, I was going to have you talk about leadership and survival. And I wanted you to reflect on what makes a good leader. What qualities does a person need to be a leader? We took the 16 personality quizzes, and some of you, based on your personality, are natural born leaders, and some of you would be quiet leaders. Some of you would shun leadership on purpose, especially those of you that are introverted. But we look at our society today, and if you turn on the news and you look at some of the people that are in the news, in politics, what kind of leadership is being modeled for all of us right now today. And I'm asking you to think about leadership because all of the characters so far, we've got Piggy, Ralph, and Jack, they all exhibit good qualities of a leader. Some good qualities in each one of them, but they also, each one of them, lack qualities of leadership. We've got Piggy, who is very logical, very willing to follow a leader, but he has some physical issues that prevent him from being followed by the masses. The fact that he's overweight, the fact that he's asthmatic, the fact that he's whiny, the fact that he wears glasses, all of those sort of weaken him in the eyes of the group, and so he can't be leader. And we have Jack, who, how do we describe Jack? He's described as not being an attractive boy, and right there, when you're talking about that population, it puts them off from Jack. But he also wants to lead with an iron fist, and that's really not the way that you can lead a group of young people, and so that puts him off for being leader. And Ralph, when we first meet him, isn't very nice to Piggy, and as a matter of fact, we don't know Piggy's name so far because Ralph has introduced Piggy as his nickname, which Piggy expressly said, please don't do. And so Ralph has some great qualities, but we're not sure what kind of leader he'll be. So I wanted to read a section from your novel on page 19 to introduce Jack and to show you how William Golding uses foreshadowing and how he brings out symbols that you might otherwise miss on a first reading. So if you had read this on your own and we were sitting in class, this is what I would be doing to point some things out. So on page 19, go down a little more than halfway and I'm on the paragraph that says within the diamond haze. And this is the scene where Jack and the choir come forward and we meet them for the first time. And I want you to take a look at the repetition of the color black and darkness and things like that when describing the choir and Jack. Within the diamond haze of the beach, something dark was fumbling along. Ralph saw it first and watched till the intentness of his gaze drew all eyes that way. Then the creature stepped from mirage onto clear sand, and they saw that the darkness was not all shadow, but mostly clothing. The creature was a party of boys, marching approximately in step in two parallel lines and dressed in strangely eccentric clothing. Shorts, shirts, different garments they carried in their hands, but each boy wore a square black cap with a silver badge on it. Their bodies, from throat to ankle, were hidden by black cloaks. Now I'm going to stop for a second. How many times did I say the word black or creature or shadow? So we're talking about their cloaks, which bore a long silver cross on the left breast, and each neck was finished off with a ham bone frill. And that's those collars that you might have seen in pictures that are white and frilly, so they've got these fancy collars on their uniforms. The heat of the tropics, the descent, the search for food, and now this sweaty march along the blazing beach had given them the complexions of newly washed plums, so their faces are bright red. The boy who controlled them was dressed in the same way, though his cap badge was golden. When the party was about 10 yards, I've turned to page 20, from the platform he shouted an order and they halted, gasping, sweating, swaying in the fierce light. The boy himself came forward, vaulted onto the platform with his cloak flying, and peered into what to him was almost complete darkness. "Where's the man with the trumpet?" Ralph, sensing his sun-blindness, answered him, "There's no man with the trumpet, only me." The boy came close and peered down at Ralph, screwing up his face as he did so. What he saw of the fair-haired boy with the creamy shell on his knees did not seem to satisfy him. He turned quickly, his black cloak circling. "Isn't there a ship, then?" Inside the floating cloak, he was tall, thin, and bony, and his hair, I have to sneeze, sorry. Not coming. And his hair was red beneath the black cap. His face was crumpled and freckled and ugly without silliness. Out of this face stared two light blue eyes, frustrated now, and turning, or ready to turn, to anger. "Isn't there a man here?" Ralph spoke to his back. "No, we're having a meeting. Come on, come and join." The group of cloaked boys began to scatter from close line. The tall boy shouted at them, "Choir, stand still." Wearily obedient, the choir huddled into line and stood there swaying in the sun. Imagine the heat. Tropical island, I don't know, gotta be between 85 and 120. Nonetheless, some began to protest faintly. "But Meridew, please, Meridew, can't we?" Jack's last name is Meridew, by the way. Then one of the boys flopped on his face in the sand, and the line broke up. They heaved the fallen boy to the platform and let him lie. Meridew, his eyes staring, made the best of a bad job. "All right, then, sit down. Let him alone. But Meridew, he's always throwing a feint, said Meridew. He did it in Gibb and in Addis and at Matins over at the Precentor. And I'm going to stop there, but the person that passes out is a character named Simon. That's a very quiet, introverted character that you need to pay attention to. He's not in your face like the other ones are. And he faints because, I'm going to tell you this right away because you'll get confused by it. He has epilepsy, and that's a seizure disorder, and that comes into play later on in the novel, so just keep that in mind. So that's your introduction to Jack and the Choir. So that was chapter 1. I still feel like I have to sneeze. Let's see. The second chapter is called Fire on the Mountain. And Fire on the Mountain is a chapter that we've got sort of a loyalty shift here that starts to come into play. And also some conflict starts right away. So we've got sort of the romance of the island in chapter 1 where they think, hey, there's no adults here, it's gorgeous, it's beautiful, we're going to just play and have fun on this island. But by chapter 2 already, we see that there's problems. Remember I told you in age they range from about 5 and 6 years old up to between 12 and 14 years old. So we've got Ralph as the leader, and at first they're quite impressed with him. They have faith in him, but he hesitates sometimes when he responds, and when he hesitates, they lose their faith in him. That's something to pay attention to. I wanted to talk about the conch, which I forgot to last chapter. Sorry about that. My notes are a little off. They find the conch shell, and for those of you who were there, I showed you a picture. I showed you the conch shell that I have in my classroom. If you weren't there, I want you to Google conch shells. They're also, you can pronounce it conch shell, and take a look and see what they look like and see how they can be used as emitting sound. But symbolically, the conch shell represents each person who holds it has the power to talk. So it represents power and authority. It also represents community and unity because when it's blown, it calls everyone together. And it also is a symbol of civility, that when they are together with the conch shell and when somebody is holding the conch shell, that there's an agreement that there will be civility, that there will run a nice meeting, and that kind of goes amok pretty quick. Give me a second. Sorry. I was going to pause this, but I don't know if I can. So in this chapter, the conflict that we have is that Jack wants to go hunting, and Ralph wants to, I think I'm getting chapter 2 and chapter 3 mixed up, Fire on the Mountain. In this chapter, they steal Piggy's glasses against his will. So for those of you who wear glasses, you know how infuriating that would be, because you need them to see, and Piggy needs them to see. So he's angry and he's frightened by it, but they take the glasses in order to start the fire. This chapter really points out what we call the duality. Duality means two sides of, and in this chapter we have the duality of fire. And we have a wood stove, and I also go camping a lot, and we have fires when we go camping, and I love fire. And in this novel, it is a symbol of hope, because with fire is the smoke. With the smoke comes the possibility of rescue, that a ship or a plane might see the smoke and rescue them. It is light in the darkness. It's pitch black on that island. It provides them with heat. But also the other side of fire is that it's destructive. And it's personified in this novel. And on page 44, we're going to take a look at a second, because one of the questions on your quiz is about personification of the fire. So I'll go over this section with you. So if you have your book on page 44, and you can see my book, how I circled them all. This is my own personal copy. So I write in my books when I have my own personal copy. So the fire is out of control at this point. And somebody says, "You've got your small fire all right." Smoke was rising here and there among the creepers. Remember, creepers are those vines, jungle vines, that festooned the dead or dying trees. As they watched, a flash of fire appeared at the root of one wisp, and then the smoke thickened. Small flames stirred at the trunk of a tree and crawled away through the leaves and brushwood, dividing and increasing. One patch touched a tree trunk and scrambled up like a bright squirrel. The smoke increased, sifted, rolled outwards. The squirrel leapt on the wings of the wind and clung to another standing tree, eating downward. Beneath the dark canopy of leaves and smoke, the fire laid hold of the forest and began to gnaw. Acres of black and yellow smoke rolled steadily toward the sea. At the sight of the flames and the irresistible course of the fire, the boys broke into shrill, excited cheering. The flames, as though they were a kind of wild life, crept, as a jaguar creeps on its belly, toward the line of birch-like saplings that fledged an outcrop of the pink rock. They flapped at the first of the trees, and the branches grew a brief foliage of fire. The heart of flame leapt nimbly across the gap between the trees, and then went swinging and flaring along the whole row of them. Beneath the capering boys, a quarter of a mile square of forest was savage with smoke and flame. And so some of the words that I circled were crawled, stirred, touch, scrambled, leapt, clung, eating, gnawing, rolled, crept, flapped, leapt, creeps, swings, flaring. Okay, so there's tons of them. So remember, personification is when we give human-like qualities to something that is inanimate. And so the fire is being described as being almost human or animalistic there. So that chapter is really just about the power of fire and how things get quickly out of control and that they aren't in control. And it sort of shows the dark side of humankind again, the way that they steal Piggy's glasses to create this fire, and then the fire gets out of control and is sort of representative of something more primitive. Chapter 3, we have huts on the beach. And this is the chapter that the conflict comes into play, because we've got Ralph as leader who's looking out to do the best that he can do, and he wants to provide fire so they can get rescued, and he wants to provide shelter so they can stay safe and feel secure. And Jack, on the other hand, really seems to be obsessed with the idea of hunting to provide food for them. That's all well and good, but there is food that they can be eating. We assume that there's fish on the island that they could catch. We know that there's fruit on the island that they can eat. And so, in my mind, my adult mind, it seems like that would be far down on the list. But Jack really wants to have fun, and his idea of fun is hunting for game, and the game on the island are wild pigs. A little bit about Simon in this chapter. Simon is revealed as a visionary or a mystic, and you might have missed that because, again, he's easy to miss. He's very diplomatic and he sees things clearly. He's very good at reading people and seeing people for who and what they are. And let me see some examples. He's different from the other boys. He sticks up for Piggy when Jack verbally attacks him. And he gets fruit from the trees for the little ones that they can't reach. but he's described by the others as being queer, which means odd, or funny. He's definitely different. Simon can't handle conflict, and like many introverts, he goes away when there's conflict, and so he goes to a special place which is very, very important in this novel, so I wanted to stop and describe it. It's called a covert, and it's a place where these bushes grow in a mat, and he's able to part the mat, and in the center there's a hollowed out space. So he can crawl in there and sit in there and be surrounded by these plants. And it's described as having candle buds. You might have noticed that and been confused. There's flowers on the bushes of the covert that look like candle buds, and it must be very beautiful. And also the area that he's in, the opening, has a lot of butterflies, and so it's just a peaceful place where he can go and be alone and reflect and get away from things. And so he crawls in there, and that place becomes very important later. But again, we have the building of a conflict there. We're only in chapter 3, and already things are turning awry. And so knowing what this novel is about whether humankind is good or evil, I think you can make some predictions about where things are headed. But go ahead and do the quiz and submit it, and I'll grade that, and then I will put the second quiz on Schoology either Friday or this weekend, and you'll have plenty of time to complete that. So keep reading. You should be finishing up chapter 4, 5, 6, and 7, and if you have any questions, you could email me. My email address is lwillett-thatcher, that's 3 T's in a row, at plattscsd.org, and I will answer you as soon as I get your email. So I hope that you are okay. Take care of yourselves. I miss you, and hopefully we'll see each other soon. Bye-bye.